Greetings everyone! And what will our webinar be about today? Today I will reveal several incredibly important topics that will be useful to each of you, absolutely without exception. And today we will find answers to the questions: why do you sometimes have problems in your work? A few topics for today's lesson. I broke them down not for the announcement, but specifically for our webinar. Let's give them 5 minutes, some of them a little more time, especially when it comes to Google. Here, and why the fixation systems that we are currently working with are not competent. And where to find a competent proxy system, or rather, how it is simply simple to do it yourself in just 10 minutes. But more on this in the process. I remind you that in this webinar, as always, I am the only one. We don't have moderators, so you can ask questions in the chat. The question will not be displayed in the chat, but then at the end of the webinar, I will be able to answer your questions. We would also like to remind you that our webinar will take only 2 hours. So, whoever asks the question last, there is a chance that we will not have time to give an answer to it. So, let's begin. Our first news. We will have several of them today. Our first news is already in our Telegram channel. This is an update to anti-detect. I am not afraid to say this word, a fundamental update of anti-detect. If many people would probably like to see some new features or something related to some know-how, then I hasten to upset you a little that there are no such chips, except for a cookie bot. Old cookie bot, I remind you. What is this functionality? This is a feature that allows you to age cookies on your main system. But the main change in anti-detect, both in anti-detect personal versions and in anti-detect Patreon, which, by the way, will be published tomorrow, is a change in the network engine. An incredibly important change. Today, in the course of our webinar, we will get acquainted with what a network engine is, what it is, and why, for example, Google, Facebook, PayPal, and other major giants have now begun to be very suspicious of anti-detect users. It doesn't matter if anti-detect is from Vektor T13 or anti-detect from some other manufacturer. The system is always the same now. The reason has been found, and you will be very surprised by it, believe me. Next, our next news, which makes me incredibly happy personally, is that bank cards have appeared on the detect.expert website. Here is a small excursus, literally a 2-minute excursion into history. We wanted to provide a service for creating virtual bank cards back in 2023. And then the service appeared. It was called 13PC. It was a handshake domain. For those who don't quite understand, this domain could be accessed through either the Brave browser or through additional utilities. I didn't want to. This is something from the category of know-how of some kind, or Web3, something like that. In short, the essence is not important at all. And this service began its work, but unfortunately abruptly went underground, because there were people who said, "Why do you need to sell at retail? Come on, make this service, give this service to us, we will work with you, and everything will be fine." And that is what happened. Cars at that time did not have any limits. That is, there were no limits later, how much you could spend, no limits on how much you could spend, what transactions could be made with them, but there were limits on how many cards could be issued. Unfortunately, and after a few years, the service reached its limit, after which in June of this year, the 13P service was successfully sold to the LAO Group from China. However, this step allowed me to accumulate a certain amount of funds and invest them in a completely new virtual bank card service and take into account all the pitfalls that we faced earlier. And now this service is fully available to all users. You can find it on the detect.expert website. I'm going to try to turn on screen sharing now. There are always small difficulties with this in-a-click meeting. I remember when we held webinars with softwarewebinar.ru. Not a single time have there been any problems with by sharing the screen. But here, unfortunately, there are always some difficulties. So literally that a few minutes and you will see a picture. I would like to give you a little excursion and show you what is inside our maps and how to work with them. This is not just an advertisement, this is a guide that will help you. So let's check again just in case. Yes, everything is there. So here is my resource, the detect.expert website. The resource is quite young. He is actually about 3 years old. And this resource began simply as a service by checking IP addresses. Well, now it has grown into a huge, just not afraid of this word, huge, if not the largest portal, where you can find anything, in particular regarding our maps. We go to the Services tab and here we see virtual cards. How do I get a virtual card? We currently have registration through support because such a service is quite sensitive. And let's just say you can do a lot of bad things with the help of these cards. Therefore, we want to counter this a little. And all you have to do is click on the Maps button, select the map, and then you can contact the support. The support will ask you just a couple of questions. No documents are required. They will just ask why you use it, what you can do it with. And they will just open access to you. Then we are in our personal account. This is where the cards are managed. You see, but how does it work? We have several countries. In this case, we have countries such as Russia, Denmark, Estonia, Spain, the United Kingdom, and the United States of America. You can choose the currency you want, and in some cases, you can choose more than one currency. I also ask you to accept that, for example, the United States, 2 regions. Dallas, New York. Oh, and here are different types of cards. That is, we have a Visa type in Dallas, and we have a MasterCard type card. And I draw your attention to the fact that on the detect.expert's website, there is also a gradation of maps according to the parameters of how they can be used. That is, for example, compare. Here's a map of Dallas. She has a universal type. If we hover the mouse cursor over the question icon, then we will see where we can use this map. We can use it in services such as Best Buy, Walmart, Airbnb, Booking. But in general, in fact, there is full support for OTA. To be honest, I forgot how it is deciphered. Gist. On any sites you can buy air tickets, railway tickets, bus tickets, hotels to book, everything you need. Plus, it is suitable for most services in order to verify the card. For example, it flies wonderfully into the wonderful Microsoft. And this is quite a serious indicator. Here, but what is it not suitable for? I'll tell you right away, it's not that simple. Not suitable for gambling and online shopping. I will explain why. Online shopping is a very risky category, which I don't want to include at the first stage yet. The problem is how the banking system works in general. When you make a payment on your card, do you think that your money immediately transferred to someone? It's not that. The fact is that the interbank, how it works, the same SWIFT and so on, transactions take time. And a bank, in fact, one bank assumes a debt obligation to another bank. Money is visually debited from your account, for example, to Citibank or Bank of America, it doesn't matter. They have been visually debited from you, but nevertheless, they are still in the bank. Your bank informs the respondent bank that such and such a transaction is in the form of, relatively speaking, a debt obligation. And the corresponding respondent bank replenishes the account of the person to whom you transferred the money, or the company. And then the banks complete this operation among themselves within a few days. Here's how it goes. And there are some very difficult moments with online shopping. You can drive the cards into huge minuses just like there is not, or rather, there was already such a card provider Viabay. You can even find their website, viabay.com. I have already talked about this provider more than once in my webinars. The provider was not very good, it was private, there was such private processing. But they were driven into the red by more than $1 million in just a couple of hours. So I won't include this category, at least for now. I doubt that a huge number of people here are interested in online shopping, but offline shopping works without any problems. That is, you can add these cards to your Apple Pay, Samsung Pay, and go to the store to pay in a cafe. In fact, we have no restrictions on offline shopping. So go ahead. But there is also a second type of card, maps like advertising. Here you can see, and accordingly, the services with which these cards will work. Advertising cards are ideal for various types of verification where you need to provide your bank card. Plus, since here in detect.expert, you can create an unlimited number of cards, you can, accordingly, if you want to verify each of your accounts with a new card. And of course, it is worth paying attention to the fact that we have a small release fee. That is, if the card is of a universal type, which can be used for offline shopping, for buying tickets, then the issue of this card costs $3. Well, if we have a card of the advertising type, that is, for verification, we have only $0.50 of this issue. Let's take a look now at what this set looks like. We can see, for example, the rest of the countries that we have and various types of maps. If we take, for example, the United States now, let's take and issue a card like advertising from New York. Click Issue New Card. Next, we enter the name of this card. That is, it will be, for example, VerifCard. You can change this name at any time. By the way, before graduation, I also draw your attention. Here you can immediately see the BIN number of the card with which it will be issued. Accordingly, it will be good for those who want to be 100% sure that this region, for example, is suitable for any service. The name of the card? You can change this card name at any time. This card name is only necessary for you to recognize this card among all the others. Just below we have the daily limit. By the way, my web resource detect.expert is available in many languages, so I am now conducting a presentation in English only so that it is more convenient for users to navigate the resource when this webinar is translated. Daily limit. You can set a daily limit. In fact, I will tell you that it is better to stop at the amount of $50,000 of the daily limit. But it is not important. In this case, I set a daily limit of 10 and a monthly limit, for example, $500,000. It has no logic, but still, I agree to the terms. And I would like to draw your attention to a very important point. There is an inscription here. It is very important. The map will be created within 5 minutes. But if we are dealing with cards, click. Here we have received a new card. Here's our map, and it is generated now. After a while, it will be available for use. A MasterCard card has been created. The map, most likely, it is Dallas. Dallas belongs. And we see the card number here. We see that all the information can be found. I draw your attention to the bin balance. So $7, here is 7 balance, $7. By the way, our Verif card has just been activated. That is about 20 seconds past. But still, I warn you that sometimes this process can be delayed. Now here we are now removing all the filtering settings, we see all our bins. On some bins we have a balance, for example, $19, $20. This is the balance of my account only. And accordingly, you can replenish your balance with any amount. It happens very simply. Click Just Top Up. Enter the balance you need, and the money from your detect.expert account will be transferred to your bin balance. And in the balance of that bin, it is distributed automatically among all your cards. That is, you do not need to top up the card separately. If you want, you can, for example, make yourself a bin balance of $10 and issue. Give yourself 20 or 30 cards. They will have $10 available to all these cards at the same time. I would also like to draw your attention to a few more points. We have all the cards in full. They support 3D Secure. And when any 3D Secure operation arrives on your card, you can see it in the corresponding list. Here, for example, is an Apple Pay operation. Such a corresponding code had to be entered into Apple Pay in order for the card to be verified in Apple Pay. Also at the top, you have your transaction history. That is, you can see what transactions were made to which card. Accordingly, you can see the bins on the right. You can choose sorting and so on. Plus, if you are tired of using this card, you don't need it, it annoys you, you can click on the corresponding icon on the right in the upper corner of the card and choose, for example, either to change its name or change the limits, block the card temporarily, or close the card completely. After that, it will disappear from your personal account. The balance of this card will not be lost because, as I said earlier, the balance is shared between all your cards of a particular bin. So, you have issued a card, done the work you need, you can close this card, you can leave it. In fact, you can do whatever you want with it. I will not tell you some technical moments, where these cards still fly. An inquisitive mind will find it anyway. Here. But in principle, the service is incredibly simple. It is very easy to understand it. Issue a card quickly, carry out some operation with it even faster, just as quickly it can be closed. And again, support for Apple Pay and Google Pay allows you to have this card in the form of your e-wallet, that is, which you have at any time and that can back you up. In offline life, if you need to pay somewhere by post terminal. Also, most likely, some users may have a question why there is no name here, for example, on the cards, and what address to indicate at the time of payment. Address, I even made a special note here. We recommend specifying an address that matches your proxy. A little later, we will add address suggestions. Well, accordingly, if you, for example, have some kind of account in which, for example, an account, figuratively speaking, GPT chat, for example, you already have your data there. Okay, you can just choose a country and leave your data at the place of residence. Alternatively, you can check where your proxy or VPN is located, where the IP address is, and thus specify the required proxy address. There will be absolutely no difference. We do not decline suspicious transactions in this case. What a name. The name is an interesting moment. You don't need a name. That is, you can specify absolutely any name you want. Cardholder's name, I mean. That is, if your virtual identity, for example your John Doe, has certain coordinates, yes, make a map at least for Osama bin Laden. Damn, it doesn't matter at all. In our case, we will not prevent this in any way. But in fact, we are probably all. The service is incredibly simple, incredibly convenient, and of course, many users have already appreciated it. I see just by the number of replenishments. And yes, there are different situations. We launched less than a week ago, I want to remind you, but the turnover of the detect.expert website has almost doubled since the launch of the maps. To be honest, I'm in the wildest expectations of such a knot. Surely you have seen the video, the screenshot of which I am now showing on the screen. By the way, the link to this video is also on your screens. It is highlighted in red. But in principle, you can find it on my main channel. What kind of video is this? What did it demonstrate? And in general, why the hell did I post it on my channel, especially after closing the site? And I'll tell you. This video, or rather this exploit that I'm showing in this video, was discovered by me quite by accident. I haven't done any research on the web transport protocol, specifically in terms of de-anonymizing the user. I confess, honestly, I calmly engaged myself in increasing the speed of the anti-detect network adapter. And let's just say, at one point I wanted to make my own website checker. Having made the site checker, having done a little magic with it, I managed to break through the VPN. Moreover, this VPN was both created by me and it was created by WordGuard. Plus, I used another commercial VPN. I won't say which one. In principle, the office is quite good, but unfortunately, it happened. Perhaps they don't know about it. Why did I publish this video, and why did I close access to the web resource? I want to remind you that since 2015, when I began to conduct detailed educational activities on forums in the grey internet, let's call it that, I have primarily dealt with the issues of ensuring user security. And there are fewer users who are interested in security at the moment than users who are interested in anti-detection, but nevertheless, you should not forget about them. And for these users, I published this video for just one purpose. This goal is written at the bottom of the slide, and it was written in the video as well. I don't know how the quality will be convenient for you to see here or not. I quote, "This vulnerability has nothing to do with anti-detect. It only exploits a vulnerability in proxy techniques. The easiest way to solve it is to disable UDP. And here I would like to address the people who came to this webinar precisely to hear about this vulnerability. The fact is that A. Disabling UDP to pursue anonymity goals is mandatory. If some shamanistic actions are not carried out on the intermediate proxyfying resource itself. That is, for example, if you have a regular VPN and it has UDP enabled, this is not good for anonymity. But if some shaman worked there, then, in principle, well, depending on what he did there, in some cases you can use UDP, but for the most part, there are very few such shamans and people who understand this. Because before this video, many users did not even know what web transport was, and that it was already working in our browsers. But using the UDP protocol for anonymity is silly. If we take the same Tor browser, for example, UDP is disabled by default. Well, as an example, because UDP itself carries a huge number of risks for de-anonymizing the user. And this video once again demonstrates that you can ensure your security, your anonymity, just by disabling one protocol that is absolutely not important for your activity. But at the same time, some may say, Vektor, so why do you say that? You used to be so passionate about UDP and said that the UDP protocol must be used. And I will say, yes, it's a must use. But do not confuse warm with soft. If we work with anti-fraud systems, we must have UDP. If we are trying to be anonymous, we are obliged to disable UDP. Because in fact, when we try to be anonymous, it happens like on this slide. That is, if a user wants to be anonymous, he, by and large, does not give a shit what some anti-fraud system thinks of him, what his fingerprints are, and everything else. He is simply engaged in his activities, which he needs. Never, not once, have I seen users who try to be anonymous, but at the same time use some commercial systems in order to do their business, let's say. Anonymity is needed for various cases. Let's not say that these are all bad things. Many of these things are good, but you may, for example, want to hide from some persecutors, from criminal elements. Or if some illegal activity is being carried out against you, you have the right to anonymity. This is confirmed by the UN Convention. Yes? Well, if you want to be as similar as possible to a real user, then of course the use of UDP is mandatory for you, because in this case we must mimic as much as possible a real legitimate sucker who sits in the evening, watches YouTube, jerks off on Pornhub and buys some online goods. Figuratively speaking, so. Therefore, my dear friends, who want to remain anonymous, I have once again many times spoken in my previous webinars, which I conducted back in the distant 2015th, 16th, 17th year, and I will repeat myself now. Then UDP was recommended to be disabled. Now it's just a must-have. So don't forget about it. Well, as for the web resource, I would also like to say something else. There is one interesting fact here: how quick can work and how web transport cannot, for example. So why does web transport get a real IP address? The fact is that this vulnerability, to be honest, is not even sure that it is a zero vulnerability, as I called it. Perhaps I even used some kind of abnormal opportunity. But in fact, it's just 20 lines of code on the back end and about 5 lines of code on the front end. I have closed access to this resource because, as I wrote, I do not pursue any commercial goal. That is, I am not going to sell some super duper solution and so on, but just repeat once again, disable the UDP protocol. Well, I don't want to let this web resource into the public yet. Perhaps I will do it later, when my checker appears. Well, now I really don't want to place it so that a couple of people come to it, and some obscurantists have snatched this technology and placed it on their shit makers. I found it, it's mine. If you find something of your own you can also not share, I will not be offended by you. So, let's move on. And now it's time for stories. As a matter of fact, this is our main topic. I'll try to imitate a drum roll now. Fucking depicted. But let's move on anyway. So I tell you, some time ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, maybe 10 days ago, I can't remember that time clearly, I started working on speeding up the VirtualBox network connection. Well, that is in anti-detect. VirtualBox's network connection is basically just two components. Well, let's round them up to two, so to speak. This is a NAT adapter with all its internals and a separate library called libcellr.ra. I poked around in the insides of this miracle of technology and I managed to do something. Look now at the screenshot before my interventions and at the screenshot after. The difference is incredible. For those who are used to speaking the language of numbers, I will say this. Before I interfered with the VirtualBox NAT adapter, its speed was about 30% of the speed of the host internet. That is, if I, for example, have a gigabit on a host in VirtualBox, in anti-detection, the network adapter gave a maximum of 300 megabits. This is on the best good sunny day, if I am very lucky and nothing freezes. And so in fact, 250, 240. Imagine how satisfied and happy I was when I brought the speed inside the virtual machine to 97, 95, 97% of the hosts, that is, I tripled it. The car began to fly. The speed is incredible. Everything happens very quickly. I'm satisfied and happy, but the fuck crept up unnoticed. Do you know what I got in the end? Here's this picture. This is complete fucking. That's how it turns out that I'm always basically on a good internet connection. Even though in many cases I have to work from different parts of the world, but I always try to make sure that I have the best possible network. And so that I get a CAPTCHA, and now this CAPTCHA, when I go just to Google, it's not Gmail, it's not any other service, it's just Google. Google gives me a CAPTCHA. I was categorically surprised because the cleanest residential IP address allocated specifically to me. There is no activity because there is only one device on it at this address. Well, in fact, you could say so. I guess I was. I performed the same operation from the outside. There are no traces. There is no CAPTCHA, nothing. I installed this old version of anti-detect, where the speed is low. Again, there is no CAPTCHA. Mysticism is simple. I mean, I reduced the latency, I reduced the jitter, I actually got the performance like on the host. At the same time, I don't change my IP address and don't use a proxy or anything like that, and I have this picture. And I can't get around it in any way. I'm trying to pass this CAPTCHA. I catch the CAPTCHA again. I install a new virtual machine. I think maybe something happened. I catch this CAPTCHA anyway. And here are incredibly interesting changes and incredibly interesting processes in my brain. I have been telling you this for so long so that you understand my point of view, where I am going to lead you now. And the solution, I will now tell you how to overcome all this and how I overcame it and what you can do. So, I understand that the trick is happening in my internet connection. That is, I don't like something. But what steps do I need to reproduce? Maybe I've done something bad and need to go to, for example, the Lix browser site and see what my passive operating system fingerprint is. Or maybe whether I correspond to some indicators of G4N or G3N and other crap. But no. Wherever you go, you're fine. You have no problems with IP, you have no problems with speed, with jitter, and with latency. You don't have any problems with your fingerprint, but they won't let you in. What's the joke, bitch? And I'll show you half of this joke now. And I'll tell you about the second half of the joke. And he's on your screen now. Here he is. IPv6. But then again, if you think this IPv6 is some kind of bad, I've been checking out IPv4 and actually need some more fucking shamanism. No. The situation is absolutely simple. The thing is, as soon as I turn off IPv6, I get the same screen. That is, even if I have IPv6. Even if I don't have IP6, Google doesn't let me in and gives me a CAPTCHA. That is mysticism again. Why did the connection here take place through IPv6? Well, maybe it just coincided. And here one very interesting crap comes to the rescue. I take interesting crap in the form of wind dump. For those who may not have encountered it, what is a wind dump? Wind dump is an analog of TCP/DEM, but for Windows. You can use Wireshark, you can use something else. And what interesting things do I catch in my traffic? That is, I decided to see what was so suspicious in my traffic. And the discovery really surprised me. I realized that my virtual machine was stupidly DDoSing Google. Such a number of requests that my virtual machine made at the time of just an ordinary standby, that is, there are no actions on the page, nothing happens, absolutely zero activity, but the virtual machine stupidly hammers Google servers. That is, I compared literally for... I don't know how much I won't lie now, I'll tell you approximately. In a minute on the host machine, I had a file of only 300 kilobytes, maybe half a megabyte. For the same time, inside the virtual machine, it was about 8 megabytes. Despite the fact that, of course, from the main host machine, I have the rest of the connections, which were also intercepted. But the virtual machine, in fact, went crazy. And here I began to think, why is this happening? After all, in fact, any of you can face such a problem. And what's more, I'll tell you, if you have any problems, for example with Gmail and everything else, then most likely it's for the same reason. Now a little more history. How does it all happen? The fact is that we always, for example, we use some kind of proxy. Who is in this proxy? That is, we know, for example, there is a proxyfier. Is there one? Yes, you know him. Is proxyfier a standalone product? It seems so. It seems that proxyfier is an independent proxy and we cannot make any claims against it. But if we look, for example, inside it, we will see an additional library that handles traffic. In particular, if we take VirtualBox, if we take, for example, not even VirtualBox, but Commu as a hypervisor, then we will find a project called libslurp. And this project, if I am not mistaken, I may be mistaken, I do not claim anything here, this project was created in the 90s, in fact. Now it is still being updated. So, in May of this year, a new version was released. But an interesting feature is how this project works. What do I mean? When we take the internals of the same VirtualBox that was developed by Oracle, we know that virtualization is not just for the Windows operating system. They are trying to virtualize Windows 11, Windows 10, Windows XP, Windows 98. Other than that, they allow you to virtualize macOS, Linux, and so on. That is in fact all operating systems that are popular, but nevertheless, for all these systems, they have only one network adapter. One type of network adapter, I'm sorry. You should not choose there from the list, I mean physical models, no. If we take, for example, our network adapter of the NOT type, yes, that is, as if in our internal virtual router, we can call it that, then accordingly, it will be the same for all operating systems. but this is nonsense, right? And now we turn to this project, the libslurp project. Having considered its functions, I was categorically surprised by the huge number of anomalies that are in this project. And in fact, we got some kind of mixture of a bulldog and a rhinoceros. That is, we do not have Windows or Linux or Android or macOS. And, most interestingly, until recently, it was not even necessary to get into this project because everything worked perfectly. In fact, since September, with the appearance of Chromium 140, we have had a certain kind of difficulties, right? That is, users have begun, for example, QR code checks and so on. You will now understand why I am saying this. This is a long opus, but my task is to make you think. So, since my VirtualBow is my anti-detect, my VirtualBox-based anti-detect is not going to cooperate there. With Linux, for example, we don't need it. Just like, for example, why the fuck should I comply with the parameters of OS2 or, for example, Solaris or FreeBSD? For them, this is fundamental. In order for their network to work, they have special network parameters. But these special network parameters will be visible in the Windows operating system in an elementary, simple way. And when using the libslurp standard library, we get the following. That DDoS that I started, and it gave Google's anti-fraud system the impression that I was a bot attacking it. Although in fact I did not take any action. Through a really sophisticated in-depth analysis of traffic, I was able to throw the hell out of the libslurp project and stuff it, let's say, with another project called Past. You don't even need to memorize this project in principle. Again, the main thing in my opus is logic. I crossed these projects and, lo and behold, not only are there no problems, it seems that after that the problems disappeared absolutely on all other anti-fraud systems. Well, that's amazing. And this moment puzzled me very much. Even though everything went well, and my operation to cut out libslurp and add the past implant in its place was a success, and at the moment I personally don't notice any problems. Stripe flies in. Well, it feels like I haven't even visited the Stripe website yet, but it's already in the air. Well, tomorrow I will publish this update, so you can check everything out, and maybe someone will have a wrong one. It may be necessary to fine-tune it, but nevertheless. So, this operation, it prompted me to some interesting moments. What points would I like to talk to you about now? The fact is that the project that we use, for example, some kind of proxy, it can be subject to exactly the same problems. And now we will try to recreate these problems and find solutions to these problems. To begin with, let's use a very simple scheme. I'm now turning on screen sharing. Let's use a very simple scheme for building a link. Just one moment. I turn on screen sharing. You know, the best assessment of yourself is when you would buy this information from yourself. To be honest, if someone had told me this, what am I telling you now? Well, for a lot of money, I would have bought this information for sure. So here we have our VirtualBox. Imagine it. What proxy options do we have? Either that, well, let's use VirtualBox as an example, then we'll replace VirtualBox with anti-detect browser. You can find its source code on GitHub without any problems. And if you open this project, you can find all the traffic constants there. That is, an incorrectly set TTL, an incorrectly set MTU, incorrectly set delays, for example. Incorrectly set. Now I would like to talk about delays separately. In short, the many parameters that handle your traffic are as compatible as possible for all operating systems, but as different as possible from the real user. And all this is in the public domain before our eyes. And I have just mentioned the delays for a reason. Look, how was it done in the standard VirtualBox? In standard VirtualBox, there was a delay of 120 milliseconds in order not to lose the connection. That is, we connect to a web resource. We have 120 milliseconds of latency in order for us to have our connection. I apologize, one moment. So, let's continue. I don't like to be distracted, but the supports wrote that there is a problem. Yes, so about delays. Let's go back to the same delay. In VirtualBox, it was done as follows. That is, when we turn to any resource, we have 120 milliseconds to get, relatively speaking, an answer. Now, networkers will spit at me even through the monitor, but I will speak for people who are not networkers so that they understand the logic in the first place. 120 milliseconds to get an answer. Because of this, what do we get? Because of this, we get a wildly laggy VirtualBox connection. And what happens when I had this DDoS? I reduced it to 2 milliseconds and accordingly my network connection just went crazy. Every 2 milliseconds, the connection woke up and sent requests. Here is a vivid example of how incorrect configuration of the engine of your proxy, can be a big problem in your work. And in fact, you will not be able to detect this by any simple means, alas. And some points, of course, I'll give you today and tell you about proper proxy. But still I want you to understand, I will repeat it again and again. So, here's our VirtualBox on the screen, here's our NAT, here's our libslurp. Cool, that is universal traffic for all operating systems, but it does not contain any data, like let's say it is similar to traffic. Windows, by manipulating the libslurp project and of traffic pumping, I got values that are 100% consistent with a real PC. So I tested them with Wireshark, with WinDump. Everything is okay. And what do you think? What result did I achieve? Did anything work for me? I'll tell you no. Neeker did not work. Imagine how saddened I was by this event. I can't figure out what the problem is. That is, I found such a cool idea in my head. I went in, redid the project, I spent a hell of a lot of time on it, but still I didn't get the result. Why is that? I'll show you now. The fact is that I get the same result again. And when I disable IPv6, my problems almost completely evaporate. But again, almost completely. Still, I can't achieve 10 out of 10 when using good proxies and so on, and I can't achieve it. And here again, I turn to the internals of the libslurp project. I conduct an analysis. I will speak a little more slowly so that perhaps my voice does not freeze. I go to the internals of the libslirp project, I look at how the IPv6 address is handled, and I realize that it's not actually handled in any way. Well, just in general, from the word at all. That is, it seems that, with the help of this IP address, you can establish some simple connection, but nothing more complex can be done. What am I doing? If we look at such projects as, for example, you have Zardext on your screen. Great project, I don't want to say anything bad. Also, the POV project, Passivus, Fingerprint, and their derivatives. Well, for example, now on the screen you can see the web resource browser Lips, which imported the Zardext project. For those who don't know, Zardext allows you to determine the use of the operating system, but no one knows how it does it. And I'll tell you how he does it. If we go to GitHub, we can find the source code of the Zardext project. And in this source code, we will see that there is a separate database with fingerprints. And without this database, the Zardext project does not function. In other words, if you just want to run this project and think that it will do black magic that will tell you what operating system the visitor to your web resource will use, then this is not the case. Only by uploading the database that was compiled by the researcher Nikolai, who created the Zardext project, only when you load the database that he compiled on his own, only then will you be able to determine which, with the help of this project, which operating system is allegedly used. The database of 2023 is more or less relevant, but my only question is how the database was obtained. And somehow, I have such an idea hanging in my head, maybe someone in the comments can confirm or refute it. An imprint was taken. Network and then mapped to the user agent. That's all. And accordingly, if there was, for example, a substitution of a user agent, then fake data is also used in the database of this Zardext project. But now, it's not even so much about fake data, but about the main thing. Zardext, POV and the like do not support IPv6, do not have support for UDP, respectively, do not have support for quick and web transport. That is, you are checking your favorite IPv4. You go to this web resource, see that you have Windows, and you think that everything is fine with you. In fact, your IPv6, which isn't handled correctly on your proxy, will show that you fucking have a Hadron Collider, not Windows. And accordingly, check your IP as much as you want on checkers, check it on anti-fraud systems. No one will understand what kind of fuck they are showing you a dick, instead of letting you in. This, in fact, is the difficulty I faced. Specifically, the libslurp library was completely lacking adequate IPv6 handling. Again, there were problems with the UDP protocol. And now I have an interesting question. And why, for example, until recently all this worked, and now, in fact, well, it doesn't work? I came up with an interesting, brilliant idea. Previously, it was very common for users to encounter such a problem as a ban after a while. That is, you register an account, everything is fine, and then you will be banned for bot activity in a few days. In fact, we could not understand why this was happening at the time. And it's really hard to understand because this action is purely on the back end. That is, according to the internal logic of the system with which we work, figuratively speaking, Google. Why did he decide to ban our Gmail account after a while? We don't really understand. Yes, attempts have been made, such as, for example, you can register Gmail without SMS, send several letters. I said this in my webinars, and we get to account life. But in fact, if we registered an account and didn't do anything wrong, why the fuck ban us? For example, I, figuratively speaking, would have taken my deceased's grandmother and registered a Gmail account. Well, why the hell did you ban my grandmother? It's not clear, is it? And it seems to me that I can only assume now, but still this assumption is bold, and I will share it with you. Previously, traffic was checked offline. I have such a very big idea. It seems to me that it seems very likely. I crossed myself 10 times just in case. But how does the system work before and how does the system work after? Then it passed it to a parallel system, which queued this task and analyzed traffic for suspicious activity. After all the bans were primarily related to bot activity, but not to anti-fraud, for example. Accordingly, we went to the service, we did not violate anything, and received a ban a few days later. What I see in this is exactly what was happening. There was an analysis after a while, and because some internal security system was finding anomalies in the traffic, they realized that this account could be used to carry out spam mailing or any other fraudulent actions. Therefore, this kind of ban took place. Now we understand that neural networks develop with every second millisecond. And it is quite possible that Google has been testing this system for a long time for efficiency and launched it together with the Gemini service, which integrated the 140th version into the Chrome browser. Again, in this case, I have no proof, no way to see the source code of Chrome because there is Chromium on GitHub and there is Chrome. Chrome is a closed source project, Chromium is open source. Even though Chrome is based on Chromium, we can't go in and see what's inside the Chromium. It is quite difficult to carry out a reverse because there is not even a map of the project. You don't know where to look for anything in the thousands of files. Well, in principle, to be honest, I don't see much point in the reverse of the Chrome at the moment. But I can only assume this from external signs. And in fact, this assumption threw us back maybe 7 years ago, 8 years ago, when we could bypass anti-fraud systems. Then, even by simply changing the user agent, it was possible to bypass the system. For those who remember, there was such a wonderful Firefox browser extension, Anonymous. Anonymous had an IP database. How many there were, I think? 20 pieces in the paid version, something like that, and about 30 user agents. It allowed you to wonderfully fraud unit pay such a merchant. That is, you could pay from PayPal accounts, from logs, without any problems at all, and you missed everything. And PayPal skipped and UnitPay skipped, then the money was withdrawn to WebMoney, and everything is super. Well, it's just like such an example. At that time, we were guided purely by the fact that there was no information in the public, and we could only guess empirically. Here we have exactly the same situation. That is, I will summarize this message a little. I'm 90% sure that Google is currently providing the rest of the satellite companies, not the satellites, more specifically, but the rest of the affiliate companies with its solution to combat bot traffic. Because, for example, such resources as Amazon, Facebook, Google, they are PayPal. They are so huge that if something happens to these resources, it is actually a threat to everything. If not to the national security of a particular country, then even perhaps to the whole world. We saw recently how there was a problem with Amazon servers, and how many services suffered because of it, just stopped working. In fact, if something happens to all of Amazon's servers, we'll have maybe 20% of the internet left, probably just that. So Amazon isn't just about home delivery, Deldex. But still, let's get back to this. How can we deal with all this? Let's take a look at what proxy tools are currently available. And now we are turning on the screen sharing again because first of all, we need to understand the logic of what we are working with. I was even a little sad. I still really wanted to believe that when I did the minimum jitter, everything would be fine. Alas, it didn't work out that way. So we have screen sharing. Okay, cool. So we understand that using, for example, a standard VirtualBox with a standard NAT is stupid. And I've already made an announcement that everything will be okay. But still, we will now consider some points. How do I proxy a virtual machine correctly? We take the NAT and put a bridge connection. The network bridge will not use lip-slur and will communicate based on the data that the C account with which, in fact, this bridge is made will receive. That is, if you tip the network bridge of a virtual machine to your network adapter, then this virtual machine of yours will actually act as a separate computer that uses the same network card as your host computer. In principle, this is all fine with us, and in fact, this type of connection is much better even than what I did. In theory, yes. After all, you just can. If we are natural parameters here, then this is cool. The only problem is that there are so many parameters. And they create exactly the same imprint as everyone else. Accordingly, if we use a bridge connection to the same network adapter, we will always have the same network fingerprint. This is a problem. Therefore, alas, we cannot use bridge. There is an option. We can make, for example, two virtual machines and we can put a virtual box place, for example, a VM vir. In principle, an excellent solution. That is, we can have a proxy fixer on this VM. Proxy OS fixation can be some kind of fix, for example, it will be some kind of Linux fixative, right? And there is a project like Dante there, or who else do we have there? Squid isn't just any squid, and Red Squid is also a pretty good proxy fixator. Well, in short, we have some kind of proxy fixator. And since it's Linux inside ours, let's add more Linux. Since this is Linux, we can simply change the parameters of traffic transmission. Everything seems to be okay, everything is cool. But we are facing one very big problem. We are faced with the problem that here is not quite the right arrow, but with it we are faced with the problem that VM has its own NAT. It is not sticky, the slip is based, but nevertheless we have exactly the same traffic constants for maximum compatibility of all operating systems. And accordingly, if we change something inside our goes, then we will not get a damn thing at the output to the NAT, because our data will be overwritten. The problem may then be to replace NAT with bridge. Do you think maybe everything will be fine in our lives this way? And we will finally be able to buy the entire winter-summer collection of Belarusian knitwear. But alas, in this case, we will also face a simple problem that we have faced before. Without our OS specifics, we will face the fact that the parameters of our network card with which we will establish a bridge connection will act as our traffic transfer parameters. And accordingly, we again do not succeed in a damn thing. That is, we can change our parameters at each stage inside virtual machines, but then these parameters are either overwritten or erased. That is, no matter how you look at it, it is possible, of course, that now, again, all the networkers will spit through the monitor. I don't even know if they see the presentation. Perhaps they vomited their entire monitor. But, nevertheless, maybe if someone proves the opposite, it would be cool. It would be cool, because I, for example, do not work with VMs. It is closed source. Here. But nevertheless, if we, for example, replace the VM with a virtual box, then the situation here will be tested one-to-one. Here I vote for it. With VMs, the situation may be a little different, but what I was able to dig up specifically from their NAT systems works exactly the same as I said about virtual boxing. Plus or minus the same. Let's move on. What are the options? Otherwise, you want to somehow move on to some logical solution? Yes. So, what can we do? There are several variations of how we can play. I would like to say right away that for some reason, users always ask a question about Raspberries and any additional firmware that can be put on Raspberries. I'll tell you this, just in case, Malinka, this is to save the microcomputer. I'll tell you that I'm not ready to vouch 100% for projects that I haven't tested on my own. Therefore, don't ask me such a question. Probably, alas, I can't tell you 100% here. But, in principle, if you are subjected to logic, right? And you will connect your Raspberry, on which there will be an operating system that overwrites all the necessary data for the transfer of traffic and is directly connected by a cable. The main thing is not to think of connecting a Raspberry between the router and your computer. This will be a bad option. But, in principle, I would like to say that you can use the share in this case. But here are the questions that I said regarding the network. It is better to check with the developers of the firmware that you are going to use. But again, in theory, everything looks very good and cool. Well, if you do not need or the option does not allow you to use Raspberries, right? What other alternatives do we have? An alternative option may be, for example, a cloud router, that is, a router that is located somewhere far away on some VPS. In principle, this option should also suit us. I will explain why. We can, if we take conditionally VPS on DigitalOcean, they actually have the same parameters in the network area as real PCs. That is, we can manipulate them in any way we want. In some cases, we will have to write to the support service at most in order for us to be allowed to do something additional on the firewall. There are many VPS services that give you complete freedom of action. And accordingly, on such a resource, you can set up your router and/or your own proxyfier if you want. I will call it, relatively speaking, a cloud router. And then, what kind of system will we build? Let's draw it now. We will have such a system. This is our cloud router. This is our cloud router, and the connection to it will not be Bridget, but like SOL2TP or PP2P. How does this happen? In the standard Windows operating system, it is possible to establish a remote VPN connection, and anyone, absolutely anyone. This is the simplest example I've played before. I installed the router OS operating system on the VPS. And for those who may not know, the OS router comes from Microtik. Here. And accordingly, there was a great VPN connection in a couple of clicks, and I could connect a virtual machine to this external router. At the same time, the use, for example, of the same external router operating system, in most cases it guarantees that we will have traffic transmission parameters that correspond to a real router. That is the same thing. The operating system, that is, there is no need to maintain, as in the case of the LIP slurp, a huge number of operating systems in order to virtualize them correctly. This is one of the options. But unfortunately, Microtik on this technology is not very suitable for this technology. On old Microtiks before the 5th version, it was possible to install an additional package that allowed for proxy. That is, now Microtiks support only the social server, that is, they can be turned into a social server, but they do not support the social client, or unfortunately, I did not find such an opportunity. But just in case, I would like to say that the OS router does not give us access to the kernel of the operating system, and in fact limits us to a fairly simple interface and nothing more. What other options are there? There are options such as, for example, we will replace the OS router with, for example, the DVRT project. You may have heard about such a project as DVRT or OpenVRT. These projects are used in the same way as router operating systems and are used on conventional routers. Yes. Plus, they're pretty easy to put on a VPS and they support social connectivity, for example. Plus, there are many. You can install OpenVPN on them, for example. In fact, you can play with them as you like. And this remote router, due to the fact that it is not within the framework of your PC, it does not obey the constants that affect traffic. That is, if your provider, for example, uses DPI, limits you in something, then in this case, you will not catch these restrictions. If your home router does something, such as modifying traffic in some way, you won't catch it either, because there is a VPN-type connection between the cloud router and your VirtualBox, and in fact, any intermediate node will not be able to penetrate it. So you get a clean VPN connection to a cloud router where you install either SOCKS or OpenVPN or any of the other proxy service options that may be available. Probably, it's all difficult. But let's put it this way. This option that I have just proposed can be used not only for virtual machines, it can also be used for example, the same browser anti-detection or for any other levels of anti-detect types, maybe for mobile anti-detect. In principle, support for these VPN protocols is also present there. I'm speaking now at a low speed. It's not very convenient for me. I try to make sure that we do not have interference in the chat. So what to do? How to raise this whole prodigy? I would like to offer you one very simple and elegant solution. I'll finish the screen demonstration now. Also, after all operations are performed, a second test is carried out in order to make sure that everything works as it should. With the help of these scripts, you can install a DVRT router on any VPS and establish a connection to it, I repeat, from my anti-detect system, from a regular virtual machine, from a mobile phone, or through some anti-detect browser. Well, as for anti-detect browsers, it is better to check with the developers as well. I think that this decision will be interesting for all of you. Moreover, I repeat, it is absolutely free. It will be available next week on the detect.expert website. Just in case, I'll give you a link where it will be available. I already have a separate free course I recorded on creating a VPN bundle, Tor VPN. Again, my author's invention. Here, I saw the interest, let's say, and the prospect in giving users an alternative to all other proxy. Because in fact, after all, I have also considered the Tron proxyfier, which I introduced into the anti-detect to replace Necari. Yes, it has become better, of course, as a proxy, but still, my research over the past few years, they led me to the idea that all this is not enough. Personally, I have a feeling that with proxy, we are, well, like playing with toys. That is, we do not have the right solution. It seems to work somehow, but well, it's not that, it's all the same. I will repeat once again. I fell into infogypsism, so this course is absolutely free. There are no hidden fees or any personal consultations. It's simple with scripts. You go in, pick up the VPS, run the scripts, get yourself a router. At any time I wanted, I contacted it through the web interface, changed my IP address on it, and that's it. I mean, yes, by the way, about IP address spoofing. How does this substitution take place? You connect by IP address, just enter the IP address in a browser, in any browser, it doesn't matter. Enter the login password from your router, go inside the router. You have VPN config saved there, for example. Select the VPN config you need, click connect, that's it. Well, everything worked for you here on the config you need. I will add again. I heard this phrase once. When you are given something for free, remember, the product is you. This phrase is not suitable for all cases, but I would still like to say about my altruistic intentions. Why the fuck do I need this if I could, for example, make money on it and so on? The fact is that I am not a developer of proxy tools, I do not make money on them, this is not my thing. My task is anti-detection. But since a large number of requests have been received, they always come in principle about how to proxy, how to do it correctly, and so on. I decided perhaps to put an end to this issue, or perhaps a semicolon, who knows. But, at least for now, this is completely enough for all users to be able to correctly and competently proxy their operating systems. As soon as the rate is published, I think it will be around Wednesday, Thursday next week. That is, what kind of course we have. On the 5th or 6th of November approximately, there will be a corresponding announcement on the Vektor T13 security channel. That is, everyone who is registered on the detect.expert website can go and get access to this course absolutely free of charge. It won't be deleted, it won't have... So yes, my main goal with this course is to help users solve problems with proxy as well as reduce the load on supports, because questions about proxying are almost every second question. Someone doesn't know how to make socks. Someone doesn't understand how to make a VPN connection. Personally, my opinion is that, of course, the public has changed, and the fact that we, for example, 5 years ago could run anything on any device, now this is some kind of problem for users. Often they write even just how to press some button, they cannot install the operating system. So you will have to take everything into your own hands and lead the users along with you. By the way, since I've started playing InfoGypsyism, I have another cool fit for you. I'll tell you now. Well, sorry, yes, I had to. I liked it now. This is the course that I had, which I have now, in principle, the mechanism of anti-fraud systems. We have created a chat, and if users are present in this chat here, they will confirm that, the course ratings are high. That is, I created an anonymous poll, and I don't know who votes in it, I repeat. And the ratings of the course are high. I really hope that this will continue to be the case. I'm pleased that I can really give users important and interesting information, but it also motivates me to present information in this form. Because if we go back in history 10 years ago, 2015, I was the one who held webinars for users all the time, and it helped a lot of people, because many people like my way of presenting information. Although I know that I give out a lot of water, and many users want to get straight to the point, I always say that anti-detect is in your head. Therefore, the most important thing you need to do is understand how the system works. And then you will no longer need a vector, you will no longer need anyone. I can give dozens of such cases when people are still in our chats, but they are already using some of their solutions, my software is being upgraded, and so on. That is, there are a lot of options. But since we are going back to our InfoGypsyism after all, not all courses are paid, of course. I'm telling you, the router course is free. Here. But I have another fitter, and now it is purely for users of personal builds. Probably some of you who have just joined our project were a little sad when you wrote to the support about the training, and the support promised to provide training materials in October. For those who do not know, just in case, I will restore in memory. When the Fraud Lab course appeared, there were several of them. That is, the first is the mechanism of anti-fraud systems. This is more of a theoretical course with the detection of any vulnerabilities or with the detection of anti-fraud systems. But in addition to the entire theoretical course, I would also like to practice, to show in practice how it all works. Therefore, it was divided into two different courses. But in fact, the exchange rate, it was partially tied to bank cards because we needed to use a resource for verification. And unfortunately, it was impossible to use an alternative resource that is available on the internet, because I cannot say where the maps come from. Therefore, the second course, Practical, we delayed its release. And now I would like to make a small bonus for those users who bought the Anti-Detect from the 19th of October to the 11th of November. Access to the practical course will be absolutely free. You don't have to pay anything extra. Accordingly, you can contact the support service and get access to this course. I will now demonstrate the list of topics on the screen. I ask you not to treat this course as a course of earnings. This is not a course of earnings. This is primarily a practical course. That is, I want to show how the registration of the same accounts of sellers, affiliate accounts is carried out, how verification in merchants is carried out, and so on. Because in fact I see that many users now do not turn to any forums. If earlier there was a lot of material on forums that were interesting, you could read it in order to find some ideas. Now the forum movement is almost dead. And I haven't even seen people doing anything new. Although I like to repeat that even out of the blue you can always find something interesting. Therefore, if you bought the anti-detect from October 19, 2025 to November 11, that is, while there is still time, you can get access absolutely free of charge from our support in Telegram. The course is recorded and ready to learn. Once again, please, I do not sell schemes for making money. I'm nothing, although I'm an info gypsy now, in fact, right? I've already done 3 courses here, but still, my main task is to teach people to work with a particular product and teach them to think. So, well, let's come to the end of our webinar now and move on to Conda. I would now like to summarize something else important based on the results of the current webinar. Look, when you work with let's take an anti-detect browser, there is, figuratively speaking, an analog of the same lip-slurp library. When you work, for example, with a Tron proxyfier, Necore, with any other solution, you use in the same way some components of the library, which in most cases are taken from the GitHub open source repository. You work with a virtual machine, or you work, that is, with VirtualBox, QEMU, use, or work with VMware or Proxmox, use. Alternative solutions, but the essence is the same everywhere. If you want to work from virtual machines, you need to use alternative sources of proxy or specially modified virtual machines. Because in fact, as I'm telling you now, that's what I'm trying to direct you to this area. Until recently, this chaos that was inside the anti-detect project, from a network point of view, it did not bother anyone. Did not bother anyone at all. That is, if I had learned this information that I have learned now, if I had learned it 6 months ago and started talking about it at webinars, well, they would have looked at me like I was crazy. Again, Vektor broadcasts some of his horror stories, again broadcasts some. And now it turns out that this information is not in vain, by the way, because it is relevant, it has become relevant. And if everything really works as I could imagine, that is, that now the traffic analysis takes place online, then it is only a matter of time before it gets to our favorite Belarusian knitwear site. So remember, the most important anti-detect is in your head, and I'll help you with everything else. Thank you for your attention. So we have half an hour left. Let's move on to the answers to the questions. There are a lot of them today. Our number has almost reached 500 people. Super, no? Incredible result. So the first question from Artifact. Vektor, hello. Hello, Artifact. What do you think about the possibility of downloading cookies from other browsers? Will this give more credibility to the anti-fraud system? Artifact. I can't say that this will give more trust from the anti-fraud system. I will explain why. The fact is that in the most minimal case, there is just a binary check of the user agent. That is, cookies, by their nature, are not intended to import exports between browsers. That is, an ordinary person cannot do this, which means that it is done by a person who is already advanced, and either or the system can simply react as the use of anti-detect. That is, if you have used one browser all the time on these hooks, then another. But there are exceptions, which I must mention. Indeed, the cookie market is also flourishing. That is, you can buy cookies on the internet, which are downloaded, for example, from a botnet and so on, and download them to your browser. But you still need to understand that cross-browser migration is one thing. And if, for example, figuratively speaking, you don't want to stigmatize anyone, If you're a scammer who bought cookies on the internet and you can see that, for example, these cookies of the Chrome browser, for example, 128, then if you upload these cookies to the Chrome browser, for example, 139, 142, which has just come out, then the anti-fraud sanctions will be minimal, if at all. Personally, my opinion is that there will be no sanctions in this case. Well, as an option. Well, the only thing I would like to specify is the browser in which you will download them, for example, if you were to download, of course. It must be clean, that is, only installed. Because only in this case will the system understand that this is a new device, perhaps there was just a reinstallation of the operating system, but again, the import of old documents. Well, something like this. Then there are ports. Many gaming platforms and services have their own dedicated ports, for example, Steam, Call of Duty, and so on. Does it make sense to open them for greater trust? Look, Artifact, I even have such functionality in anti-detect. I will say, in fact, not a single time have I noticed that this functionality works as we expect. That is, in fact, yes, it is possible to scan the user's computer. Take eBay. eBay, for example, scans for remote ports. Yes, remote administration ports. There are also many sites that scan for remote administration ports. But it's stupid to carry out such a targeted network attack and check you to see if you have games on your computer. I think that secondly, you can get for this as for the same GDPR norms. That is, if you want to remove, for example, a device that uses remote administration, that's one thing. But why would you want to remove people who use games? That is, you need to justify it, and I doubt that the same eBay would do this. Well, if we take anonymity, then of course it is necessary to do this for anonymity. But there is one more point. Opening a port is one thing. But who will hang on this port? That is, this port should not just be open for you. An open port is bad. You must have some kind of service hanging at the port. And moreover, another interesting point, in many cases you can even communicate with these services. Accordingly, if you just put some kind of plug there, it may not always work. So I would say that it depends on the situation. The third question, what system is QuickBooks based on? If I'm not mistaken, the last time I checked it was in the summer. Once there was such a large influx probably, in winter I will say this, people who work with QuickBooks then somehow fell. Tridmetrics there was, and in particular the True IP project, twisted to the maximum, in my opinion, again from Tridmetrics. I hope I've answered your questions. So, the next question. Question from Itamar. Will there be an analysis, or at least a little more information about zero-day web transport at a closed webinar for course participants? Yes, if you're interested, of course there is no problem. And by the way, since you're asking this question, we had a webinar for course participants last Saturday. Today we have a general webinar. We were supposed to hold it on Thursday, but unfortunately, I simply did not have time on Thursday because of the huge traffic jams. I think we will hold a webinar for the course participants on Tuesday next week. Approximately. I don't want to promise now. We have live chat. That is, I am constantly in touch with you there. Let's, choose a day. Maybe it will be Monday, maybe it will be Tuesday. And we will hold a closed webinar purely for course participants. I will tell you, of course, about web transport. No sweat. There is only one worker. Dimitri, hello. Hello, there is only one worker. What are the life hacks when working with Tridmetrics and FingerprintCom? Tridmetrics, definitely the presence of IPv6, just its presence here, as far as I know, at least at the moment, they do not use any serious measures in terms of traffic assessment. Because you need to understand, again, a very important point is architecture. That is, imagine that we, for example, communicate with Google. We connect using the same UDP protocol. We connect using the Quick protocol, that is, directly to the Google server. And in the case of Trimetrics, Trimetrics is a pure JavaScript, and accordingly, it cannot perform such an analysis of traffic that can be performed, for example, by Google or any other system that hosts this tracking system. But at the same time, I would like to note something else. DPI Pro, get it? It will not be possible to conduct it here either, despite the fact that you, for example, are Google. Why? Because DPI is carried out at an intermediate node, and in the case of Google, it is possible to check for protocol anomalies, with the help of which, for example, the Google Chrome software allows you to communicate with Google servers. That is, if, for example, they allow us to communicate with the help of TCP, yes, cool, they can catch us by TCP, by UDP, by Quick Transport, by ASMP. Yes, these are the protocols that they support, and we, accordingly, use our browser to communicate with their servers using these protocols. But if we take, for example, the same Edge, then we are already deprived of such a need. Partly. Therefore, it is easier to work with Edge than with Chrome. Farther. Question from Yaroslav Lysenko. Under the bookmaker's office? There will be cards under the bookmaker's office, but I repeat, probably, together with cards for online shopping. Here you need to understand the risks and benefits. That is the benefit. The biggest benefit in this service is the creation of new maps. This is understandable. But how many of them will be created for bookmakers? How many will be created, for example, or for Amazon, if thousands, 2-3 people work there with Amazon, or there are 500 people with bookmakers there? Well, it's difficult. We need to look at the risks. Let's put it this way. It is clear that there will be no large transactions. That is, how many regular transactions are there? Up to $1,000, $500, $800? You can see it? I can't say yet. On my previous service, I did not launch a bookmaker. That is, everything was available, but I did not run any separate statistics on bookmakers because the people who bought the service, they worked with a slightly different product. So, of course, I want to do the best for users, but there is a time for everything. Not even a week has passed since the launch. Next, the user of AA Vektor is waiting for the staff update to version 1.4, and I have already written about it. Tomorrow there will be an update for all versions, for everyone in general. And plus, even for Patreon, we should not forget about Patreon users in any case. So tomorrow, here, I publish the changelog on the channel, the release date too. That is, at about the same time as we are communicating with you now, at about the same time tomorrow, all versions will be published on the detect.expert website. Farther. Question from the user Retro-Grandmother. Good evening. How do you understand that local software is being used and how to deal with it? If the question here is about what requests are made to the operating system or to the hardware, then first of all, you need to go to the Microsoft website and find there a project that is called Sysmon. If I'm not mistaken, that's what it's called now. It's a 1-in-1, 3-in-1 derivative of the Regmon project, Philemon, and someone else, some Mon. Official software from Microsoft. Here, let me throw it off for you now. One moment. If I find it quickly. Yes, I found it quickly. I'm sending you the link. This is where you need to start. And then you need to contact GitHub. I definitely won't find it quickly here now. And you will need to pull 2 projects from GitHub. One is called API Spy or Win API Spy, which allows you to log all calls to the Windows API. And the second project is called WMI Mon. Umimon is in the Vektor T13 repository. This project allows you to define queries to the WMI environment in order to identify what the system is requesting. The next question. But I hope I've answered your question. That was the question. Next question. Question from user Kurochka. Hello, Kurochka. How many programmers do you have? How do EU and US authorities affect your anti-detect and other anti-detects? How not to go to jail by selling services similar to yours? Or anti-detect with data storage on the servers of the anti-detect service? At the moment, there is no stable number of employees for me. Our stable staff is 18 people, but we constantly attract additional people who work for us part-time, and therefore our staff can increase to 30 people or more. Regarding the US authorities, they don't affect my anti-detect in any way, because I don't cross paths with them in any way. The EU authorities, in the same way. I have already given you can call this interview or just a story about how I visited Europol, and there are no complaints about me. I don't collect user information. Understand? This is where you are faced with an important question. I don't have anything stored on my servers other than the user profile. The user profile consists of purely technical information. There is not even a user's IP address. And I want to draw your attention to the fact that I use a public licensing system called keygen.sh. Anyone can register an account there in 5 minutes absolutely free of charge and get acquainted with the functionality of this equipment, this product. Here, my software gives connections to only 2 servers. These are keygen.sh servers. And when you use old Cookiebot, you connect to one VPS on DigitalOcean, which, depending on your IP address and time of access, selects the necessary sites and transfers them to old Cookiebot so that old Cookiebot can actually start its journey. Here, that's the only thing that plus this old Cookiebot has an unencrypted connection. That is, anyone can connect to the same UPU and see the same list of sites. So as for how not to go to jail, not to encounter, not to mess with carding, not to mess with drugs, and not to store anything on your servers. Here. And so in fact nothing else is needed. I just sell hammers. I don't make anyone smash their heads with these hammers. Let's move on. Next question. Question from user Kurochka. So the hen asked the same question. So now we will delete it. So the next question. A question from David. Greetings, dear friend. Greetings, David. Still, I want to ask at least one question. It bothers me that you want to implement banking transactions. After all, someone can use it to display logs and so on. The risk is very high that you will be in a stand. After all, such a rotten person can betray you. Why are you taking such a risk? I will explain why. I have been on the market for many years. Well, that is, look, if we take 2009, you can find me on the forums. That is, I publicly hack servers, I show how I do it, and post the results to the public. I've been providing for 2015. I'm having a big... No, it's the 13th year. I'm lying. It's the 13th year I've got the world's largest phone flood service. No one has ever had a larger one in the entire history of the universe. Nevertheless, I am free. Again, operations on Darkman anti-detect. I always act within the legal framework, and it is always possible, let's say. There are drug laboratories. There is, for example, a drug laboratory which is located in the basement of some abandoned building, an unlicensed drug laboratory. And there is a pharmaceutical plant that produces drugs, but produces them absolutely legally. As a matter of fact, it is exactly the same. And again, in operations, financial transactions, there is such crap as the area of responsibility. That is, when a particular offense occurs, responsibility can be incurred for this offense, or rather, damage can be caused to completely different institutions. In some cases, it will be damage to the insurance company. In other cases, it will be damage to the bank. In third cases, it will be damage to the merchant. In fourth cases, it will be damage to the cardholder. And therefore, in this case, I always try to minimize my risks, but to act, I repeat, completely within the legal framework. I don't have to risk a venture like detect.expert because, well, let's put it this way, it brings in more per day than people earn in a year. So the meaning of risk in this case is not justified. So don't worry, David, it's going to be okay. So, many questions here. Question from worker 1. Dmitry, how important is Quick when working with ThreatMetrics and Fingerprint.com? I won't tell you with Fingerprint.com. In my opinion, they don't care about Quick at all. ThreatMetrics uses this connection, but again, not everywhere. I will explain why. As I said earlier, we have a connection. We can integrate ThreatMetrics into a web resource using a regular JavaScript, and then they can't use any QWick. Just like Fingerprint.com. They simply integrate their script. They cannot use the Quick protocol in this case. But if ThreatMetrics, for example, may have some of its own special solutions for some large companies, then, of course, they will pay attention to QWick, because in their personal documents, which you can find on the website, or just search for ThreatMetrics file type PDF, and you will find a lot of presentations of their products. Especially note the product called TrueIP. It is their top product, well, let's just say the top technology of all ThreatMetrics. And there they are just talking about Quick, that is, that they use it farther. Next question. Question from Korochka. Owners of physical farms from modems that are used for proxies are also subject to influence from the EU and the US. How not to go to jail keeping such farms? Well, the United States, you need to understand that the United States is not one single state. It is still, in fact, consider 50 different states that have different laws. Again, a crime committed in one state may be considered a crime only in that state, or it may be a federal crime. In fact, you just need a good lawyer who can advise you on the competent conduct of this business. And no one will forbid you to use a large farm, unless, of course, it will be used in some kind of problem, for example. Basically, do you know what the problem with farms is? Not that there is the internet, but in SMS spam. This is basically what they can be punished for. So the next question. Question from user Victi. Good evening, Dmitry. Good evening, Victi. What percentage of the data is relevant from the course of 2023? Did interaction with the authorities from school affect the move? To be honest, I can't tell you what percentage because I've already forgotten this course. Alas. And again, I was just a teacher there. I was not, this is not my course, this is not my author's course. My author's course, here I am actually them, my first author's course that appeared, here it is available on the detect.expert website. This is a VPN course, Tor VPN, which is completely free. The second course is Fraud Lab, where we analyze anti-fraud systems theoretically. And Fraud Lab Cybercrime, this one, it's practical. This is paid, and here is a course on creating a router. It is free. That is, at the moment, I have 4 courses in total. 2 paid, 2 free. Interaction with the authorities from school influenced the move. No, it did not affect in any way. No, well, to be honest, I can say that I just know how to be in the right place at the right time. Let's put it this way. Because, well, you have to understand that in many countries of this wonderful globe, when you have some money, other people take it as a personal insult. So you need to understand perfectly where you are, who you are friends with, and so on. A voice, a voice, a voice, a huge communication, a huge number of messages in the voice. Ah, Alexander, why can't cards be used in gambling? Will there be an expansion in this direction? As I said earlier, yes, there will be expansion. Here, I will definitely add gambling, but I can't say when. Let it spin up, because I have just started working. We need to see how it will go, what the demand will be. But for now, that's all. So far, everything is fine, even without gambling. Just super. Better than I could have imagined. We'll see what happens next. Why can't it be used in gambling? Well, because I said so. In fact, of course there is. Each operation has its own code, and we can block the codes of those operations that we do not want. That is, it doesn't matter if you go and buy a nuclear warhead, or, as I keep saying, a pink Amazon Lundox, it's still going to be the code. The operation code will be the same. Here. Well, as for verification, maybe in some bookmakers, your cards will fly away. You won't even need to wait for something. I don't know, I have to try. Farther, the next question is a question from Yaroslav Lysenko. You can add other methods of replenishment. Crypto is inconvenient. If you need other types of cryptocurrencies, of course, we can add them. You can write about this to the support, and there is no problem. We will add them. But again, if it's going to be some kind of crypto there, like Trump, for example, figuratively speaking, which is not popular, you're the only person who wants to add it. Well, perhaps we will refuse you after all. And if it's some kind of popular one, like figuratively speaking, Monera or whatever else we have. To be honest, I'm not very good at popular sports, but for example, Tone, for example, right? Well, of course, we will add why not. We always go to the rescue of users. Next, there is only one question from the worker user. A man does not waste time. He did not waste time. Super wonderful. Well, zero-day web transport exploits will not be used by top anti-fraud systems. They won't, I'll explain why. Because, well, this is a specific exploit of this. Maybe, I don't know. I honestly can't say that I'm some kind of expert in exploits. Maybe it's some kind of undocumented possibility. Maybe it's not quite an adequate browser response. So alas, I can't say. As for whether the Quanon router is affected by this, the Quanon router is a great product. Excellent. I think it's probably the best on the market. But unfortunately, we did not conduct this kind of tests because there is simply no time for them at the moment. And again, it doesn't even make sense. Because this exploit was primarily aimed at drawing the attention of people who are engaged in anonymity to the fact that it is better for them to turn off the UDP. It was not aimed at selling some product to people who need multi-accounting, you know? So here, even tests, in principle, are not my reason yet, as they say. So, next question from the user Dimitri. Please tell me, if there are penalties for payments with the status of a handle in the cards, is there any critical handle rate for the bin or account? No, at the moment at least, we do not have such fines. But anything is possible. Here, and let's just say the statistics will show more. Because, as I said earlier, the service that I created before, there were no problems at all. That is, we did not encounter anything other than shoving money into our pockets. And with this service, we will need to collect user statistics as much as possible. If there are any penalties against us from our partners with whom we work, partner banks, then unfortunately we will be forced to introduce some kind of fine in order to make users more careful. This is purely as a preventive measure. Farther. User vol. I work with European countries. How much does proximity to European servers affect better results? For example, the ping rate decreases by about 40. The alas cannot be said for everyone. But I will tell you something now. If we take Europe and the United States, that's actually all of Europe and the United States. Europe is more loyal to everything in general. That is, I have never encountered resources failing due to poor speed. The United States will begin to impose sanctions without any problems. Europe, and in general it seems that it doesn't matter. So, but I wouldn't bother you too much in your case. Well, this is my personal opinion, and again, it must be said that it all depends on a specific web resource. But I, for example, with my experience, cannot name a single web resource that would impose any sanctions on users for low speed or high ping. Next question from user Ivan. Vektor, what can you say about NMVPN as a means of anonymization? Will it be suitable as an alternative to Tor, which has a UDP that works, which has a UDP? NMVPN, if my memory serves me right, Ivan, this is such a site. They have a black background and green pictures. They, if I'm not mistaken, have something less than 3,000 active users only. And this is extremely little. Yes, they show that. Let me even try to come in now. This is the kind of site I'm talking about, so I don't fuck around here. Well, yes, this is that site. Yes. I know this decision, but to be honest, I can't tell you. In practice, I haven't really tested it. They've got over there, I see these 5 hops. They want to jump over 5 hops. By the way, I'll tell you a very interesting thing about hops now. This is something that all anti-detect users should like. Now, one moment, I will finish answering the question of user Ivan. Where is the click rally? Yes, I haven't tested this VPN. Unfortunately, I can't say anything about it. The number of users they have is quite small. Plus, the creators, well, are also not very clear to me personally. I don't want to put labels, but you know, for some reason, I don't know why, maybe because of my inner, for some reason I would not trust this project. Here. Well, I remember on GitHub, on Darkman, a dude once sold a VPN on elliptic curves, some kind of bullshit. Here, in fact, you can call anything safe, but without any public audit, you can only trust it at your own risk. And this is very important. That is to understand how much you can risk. As for hops, what I wanted to say. If you pay attention to, if you notice where we have the changelog here, point number. Seven. Anti-detect personal versions. This will not be in Patreon, but in anti-detect I will add it. Ability to change hops. What are hops? This is the distance to the resource. I found an interesting opportunity in the same toothpaste resource, in the place of which I put lip slip in its place. I found the ability to change the number of hops, which I thought was theoretically impossible before. And again, this leads me to the fact that sometimes network operators complain about me, say, hey, fuck, it's impossible, it's you who came up with something, fuck, some other shit, and then I post it. Once, the networkers disappeared like farts in the air. Fuck, dumb them, bitch, that's where they fuck knows him. Only the stench remained fucking here. Therefore, I added this hop substitution system here in the same way. Let's see how she plays in practice. In fact, it, relatively speaking, can reduce the number of intermediate nodes for you, for example, from 15 there to 7, for example 8. So it will be interesting to get feedback from users like this. So next, the next question, a question from David about anonymity using UDP. If the perfect cesspool works in the middle, there is no way to cope with which IP you are sitting with. The question is different. Is it worth implementing such a decision in commerce, let's say, a finished product for sale? If you mean a finished product like a cesspool, then, in principle, I even thought about creating my own sewer. But unfortunately, I keep this project on the back burner, figuratively speaking, because I do not understand how interesting it will be to affiliates. In fact, I would say that the creation of a good cesspool is not just good, but the best in the world. Well, this is a matter of 3 months maximum. Maximum, there is less work there than the work was done on debit cards. And you can, of course, make a good project, but I have not studied this market. Maybe someday I will. Well, as for the punching, if you mean cracking an IP address with this exploit I found. You know, as I said earlier, I have very big doubts that I found it first. Well, just for one simple reason, because I am categorically unlucky in gambling. Here. And I couldn't hit such an interesting jackpot here, if I may say so. Plus, it's missing, which is interesting. Sometimes when I post a video on a YouTube channel, various shady personalities start writing about buying something interesting and so on. In particular, I remember that in 2018 I posted a video on how to create a scam container of WinRAR. I'll tell you a little now. This is a branch. In short, once I drank a beer and sat in the company, and the dude was the only one there talking about betting. Here I say, since you fucking believe them, fucking forecasts and so on, at that time there was still some kind of word. Capers. Capers. Capers, right? Capers. Although what does it have to do with it? Nea. In short, they were called that somehow. Here, capers are delicious flowers, delicious fruits, and these were definitely tasteless fruits. But the point... In short, this dude tells me that they dumped the archive to him before the match. The match passed, he was given a password, he kind of entered this password and saw the result. Some kind of system, very similar to that of Mr. Swintus from The Simpsons. Well, once we made a bet that I would be able to predict the outcome of any match at all. So, by the way, remember, in principle, I have not lost this skill yet. I can be your fucking betting guru. I'll tell you how I did it. I created, I think, about 15 documents, just a notebook, and in this notebook I write, the one will win. Well, in short, we then bet on football, I think, or on boxing. The fuck knows him, I don't remember. Yes, I calculated more or less normal results in the plus and minus of both teams. And then I had such a stray, I was able to pack these results into one archive. And each file had its own password. This can be done in a regular WinRAR. You can do it without any problems. Here, but only the files will be visible. And it turns out that I had the opportunity then to make the files not visible to each other. That is, you open the archive, you can't see what files are there. And when you enter a password, the file you need is opened. Here, and then I mocked people. When I threw this, but the person really believed me so much that he wanted to bring money. Well, it turns out that I watched the match. I reset the password for him, he opens it, says, well, you're lucky. I did this several times. In short, the dude is... So why did I say this? And regarding shady personalities, when I published the video in 2000, in 1999, a lot of people, such shady personalities, wrote who wanted to buy. And this video, to be honest, with an older exploit, has zero reaction at all. That is, the support wrote only questions about anti-fraud and anonymity. But somehow no one in commerce was interested in this. So, in principle, maybe either this decision is already known to me, or people don't understand what it is, or no one fucking needs it. That is, any of these three options in any way. Let's move on. So, question from user Krochka. The hen is also well prepared today, or has been prepared. First, is your anti-detect on Android comparable to a regular Android smartphone, or some checkers will not pass the anti-detection? Kurochka, at the moment we are going through all but one. The fact is, what am I experiencing the biggest problem with right now? The biggest problem is emulating a fucking fastboot on VirtualBox. That's actually the only thing. When I can overcome it, get to this crap that no one has done before me, then Android will work the same day. So far, I don't even understand how to implement it correctly. Well, all the other checkers, safety net of course, you can easily bypass it, even with a master's degree. Here, but programs that check Android integrity are all passable. The second question. You said that you know how to create deleted anti-detections from MacBooks. Is there a similar way for iPhones? No, the architecture is completely different. If, for example, you replace EFI in the MacBook, it's, well, a supported option. That is, it's an allowed option. Here, we don't hack anything, nothing at all. We just load our EFI, our bootloader, but in iPhones, as far as I know, you can't do this. He did not study and did not bother. So, again, a huge message. The number of messages about the sound. Sounds. Next is a question from the user Boss Hunter. Good evening, Dimitri. Good evening, Bonus Hunter. Tell us about the cancellation of geolocation. Are there any subtleties at present? ESP32 no longer works. To be honest, Bonus Hunter, I haven't dealt with this issue for quite some time, because I have my solution, it still works. I'll tell you about it just in case. Maybe it will prompt you to do something of its own. Look, who uses, for example, geolocation? They mostly use an exploit here, right? How can you deceive them? They request geolocation by IP address, we know that. They request geolocation if we have any GPS module. In anti-detection, for example, there is a GPS module, it can bypass it. They request geolocation from the surrounding Bluetooth devices. Although I have a lot of questions about this technology, of course, but still. Well, and finally, they request geolocation for your Wi-Fi environment. So, the Wi-Fi environment, they request geolocation by accessing the Windows WLAN API and by the usual Windows hook, a technology that you can find on the internet without any problems on GitHub. You can hook the WLAN API responses. You don't need to intercept requests, you need to intercept responses. And accordingly, you can simply spoof information about the Wi-Fi networks around you on each of these answers. That is, if you ask, we skip the question and intercept the answer. By the way, about GeoComply. In our case, this is not an advertisement now, this is for those users who are present here and have a build for GeoComply. The update is already ready. I plan to issue most likely on Monday already. Here, after issuing all the other anti-detections, we have type number 9 there. I wrote a separate item in the changelog. Here, so you can contact the support and get the update. We do not sell GeoComply builds for all new customers. Further, next. and So, Gijbaba users. Hello, Gijbub. I'm writing a question at the moment when there is a story about the pale network of a virtual machine. I have a problem. I literally can't drive with Okta anti-detect, don't laugh, into the red cross. The proxies are the purest, obscenity too. Is it a pale virtual machine or what? The most likely. I apologize for asking about a third-party product. Now I'm looking in the direction of yours. Dear Gijbobo, unfortunately I cannot answer this question simply because there is very little data. The proxies are the purest, okay? Okay. The material is also wonderful. But there is one point, a moment that is important. I can't say about a specific anti-detect, but I can say about most browser anti-detects. They don't support UDP in your country, do they? I don't know if it's a secret or a revelation for you, but those browser anti-detect sites I've looked at, they only support the TCP protocol. They even fucking WebRTC simply replace the packet header, and that's it. UDP is not available to them, Quick is not available, Web Transport is not available. By the way, apparently, they have long found a solution to my vulnerability. That's why I'm going to try to drop you something for a check, but don't be offended if I don't. There was a very good checker, but not? I won't give it to you? The fact is that the correct connection can be checked using UDP or the same quick using NGINX. But I can't find any checker sites. There was an official website. I don't know. Maybe it doesn't work for me, but it will work for you, but I would recommend you to visit it. Well, this is the official NGINX website. It's unlikely that it will stop working. There was a very good quick checker here, and I recommend you to watch it. So in your case, I would look primarily in the direction of UDP and the WebRTC connection. Not just a header, but using the stun protocol, namely a connection using turn. Well, or just look for some checkers on the internet. Quick. But not on the site, but the link. I don't know, you can in principle try it. No, alas, I can't do it quickly now. There is no site at hand. There was a good NGINX, but I can't find the official site yet. So most likely, contact your developers of this browser. Perhaps they will help you in solving this issue. And here we have a user, David, who sent you, I'm going to transfer the webinar now, a site for checking the quick. Pay attention to it. The site is very scary and very serious. But fuck David, respect. The site is just crazy. The most site... Well, by the way, let's check, yes, how many on your host and how many in the Virta. In the anti-detect browser, there will be green marks and how many red. David, respect. The site is just top. I took a quick look now, if he works the way he works, it's just chic. By the way, I apologize. There's literally one moment. I will now return to the answers to the questions. I want to check something quickly, literally in one firewall rule. Is this really such a site? It's just that when I see some interesting technical stuff, it's just cool. That's all. I disabled the UDP protocol and the site stopped loading. So everything is okay. So it's a really cool site. So check, open it with your anti-detect browser and see how well it works. So, next. The CCA user says that A for Zardox, there is a POF with IPv4 plus IPv6 support and proxies with such a solution and YDP support. SSA, thank you very much for the information. I have not found such projects. If you have one, share it in the comments. It's really interesting. The POP declared superficial support here, but Zardox is 100% no. And the POF announced support for IPv6, but to be honest, I didn't even find it. No, I definitely did not. But the fact that you found disrespect, I will now know too. We have a huge number of messages here again. Today there is just some incredible amount. So. Sound. Sound again. The questions are repeated. So the questions are repeated? Okay, let's go now. I'm probably already here for 300 more questions, probably. Let's probably finish now because we have only, well, none left. We overlimit 25 minutes. So I tried to answer as many questions as possible for the future. I ask, as always, at the beginning of each webinar, ask questions as early as possible so that I can answer them. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to give me this wonderful Saturday night. I hope that the information I have provided will help you in your research and in your fight against anti-fraud systems. Well, tomorrow expect a great update of the anti-detect from me. And next week, a free course on how to raise your cloud router. Thank you all for your attention. I wish you a pleasant evening. Goodbye everyone. Until next time.